Today, we're unpacking a moment when the world was absolutely on a knife's edge, the high-stakes talks between the US and Iran and Islamabad. They were supposed to end a war, but instead, they collapsed in a pretty spectacular fashion.
And when I say spectacular, I mean it. The fallout was immediate. Hours after the talks failed, this headline dropped. The US didn't just go home, they doubled down, slapping a full naval blockade on Iran. You just can't overstate how high the stakes were.
All right, so let's get into what really happened here. These weren't just some standard diplomatic meetings. No, this was a desperate, last-ditch effort after a month of intense fighting to stop the Middle East from tipping over into a full-blown regional catastrophe.
And to really get why these talks were so incredibly important, you have to understand the context. You have to see just how close to the edge the entire region really was.
And what's just wild is how fast everything went sideways. I mean, look at this timeline. In just a matter of weeks, we go from an air war to Iran shutting down one of the most critical shipping lanes on the planet. That move basically triggered a global economic panic, which forced everyone to agree to a ceasefire. And here's why that was such a massive deal. The Strait of Hormuz isn't just some waterway. It is a vital artery for the entire global economy. By choking it off, Iran suddenly had this incredibly powerful lever. It was a way to inflict immediate economic pain on the whole world, and it forced even their biggest enemies to the negotiating table.
Which brings us to a really interesting question. In a world with plenty of diplomatic heavy hitters, how did Pakistan, a country with its own serious challenges, end up being the one indispensable mediator in this whole mess?
Well, this really breaks it down for us. It wasn't just one thing. It was this perfect storm of factors. They had a huge national interest in stopping a war right on their doorstep. And crucially, they had the trust, or at least working relationships, with everyone, Washington, Tehran, and Riyadh. Plus, and this is key, they had a history of pulling off this kind of high-wire acts before, like when they helped connect the US and China way back in 1971.
So, what's really crucial here is how Pakistan just seized the moment. While its big regional rival, India, was seen as playing it safe and leaning toward the US, Pakistan was incredibly agile. Sure, they condemned the first strikes, but then they immediately pivoted and made themselves the essential go-between for everybody. They played their hand perfectly.
And this quote from the Belfer Center really just nails it. Pakistan's role here wasn't some accident. It was a smart, calculated move based on deep geopolitical realities, proving that when a real crisis hits, things like geography, trust, and history, well, they still matter more than just about anything else.
Okay, so the stage is set. Let's head inside the Serena Hotel in Islamabad and take a look at how these incredibly high-stakes negotiations actually went down, and of course, where it all fell apart.
You could tell how serious this was just by looking at who showed up. I mean, the US sent Vice President J.D. Vance with a massive delegation of nearly 300 people. Iran sent its super powerful parliamentary speaker with a 70-member team. This was absolutely not some low-level chat. The top brass was in the room.
And for 21 grueling hours, over just 2 days, they were locked in these intense negotiations. We're talking round-the-clock talks, running through the night, with Pakistani mediators literally shuttling back and forth between rooms, trying to close these huge gaps.
Meanwhile, the scene outside was just as tense. Islamabad's red zone, that's their government and diplomatic hub, was in complete lockdown. Over 10,000 security personnel were deployed. The entire city basically became a fortress, which really tells you everything you need to know about the fragile diplomacy happening inside.
And in the end, it all boiled down to this. They actually made some progress on other parts of the ceasefire, but the whole thing completely shattered over two fundamental issues that neither side would budge on. The US demanded Iran give up its control over the strait and kill its nuclear ambitions for good. For Iran, both of those were seen as essential for its own security and sovereignty. There was just no middle ground to be found.
Now, if you ask the Iranians, a deal was incredibly close. Their negotiator later claimed they were, and I quote, inches away from a memorandum of understanding, which is basically a formal agreement. But they accused the US team of changing their demands right at the last second, which they say is what killed the whole deal.
So, the talks have collapsed. A naval blockade is in place. What in the world does this failure mean for the future of the Middle East?
This question, which was posed by an analyst at the Belfer Center, really gets to the heart of it all. Was this a genuine shot at peace that just failed? Or was this whole thing just a timeout, a pause for both sides to rearm and get ready for the next, maybe even bigger round of fighting? Well, the expert consensus seems to be pointing toward a pretty disturbing new reality. The Middle East is entering this more chaotic era where the US is still a huge player, but maybe not the only major player anymore. Trust has basically evaporated, and it's being replaced by these fragile deals that are just about managing conflict, not actually solving it. And the reason this matters to you is that a region stuck in a constant cycle of crisis means more unpredictable energy prices and a lot more instability for everyone.
In a last-ditch diplomatic move, Pakistan is now trying to reframe the failure. They've started calling it the Islamabad process, which is a clever way of saying, hey, this wasn't the end. It was just the very difficult beginning of a much longer negotiation. They're trying to keep the hope for diplomacy alive, even if it's just by a thread.
And that leaves us with this final, really sobering question. The failure in Islamabad wasn't just some regional drama. It has set the stage for a new era of instability, one of nuclear brinkmanship. And the consequences of that, well, they're going to be felt far, far beyond the Middle East. What that means for global security is something we're all going to have to confront.